Well, thank you everyone for joining us today and attending our webcast titled Extending Siebel to Your Mobile Workforce. My name is Don Nanneman. I'm VP of Marketing here at Amind, and I'll be joined today on the call by our Chief Technology Officer, Rob Wing. One of the things I'd like to do to kick off the webinar is start out with a quick poll. One of the things that always helps us as we're presenting is to get a little bit better idea about how organizations are working. And so one of the things I'd like to do is to start with a quick poll. And if you wouldn't mind just answering a quick question for us, and that is, how many mobile apps has your organization deployed? Simply select from the three choices, and I'll share the results with you here in just a moment. So interesting. We're seeing quite a mix here. So as you can see, we've got a pretty much of an equal spread between people that have introduced 1 to 5, 6 to 10, or 11 or more actual mobile applications. So good. Thank you. Thank you for doing that. Well, the whole idea around mobility is something that's certainly become top of mind with many organizations, and we see a lot of coverage in the press and the media about it. One of the topics often referred to as mobile first. And not only are we seeing it in the news media, we also see a number of conferences that have been put together. If we've learned anything in the last couple of years, and certainly this year, is enterprise mobility is on a skyrocketing trend. Everyone's interested. There's a lot of focus and a lot of activity around it. There's different approaches that you can take as an organization to delivering mobility to your field organizations. One is to simply take web applications and extend them to your mobile devices by using the browser that's available on all of the mobile devices. Simple solution, you only build the application once, but of course you end up with the limitations of what you can do with the web in a web browser. The second approach, and the one that's become much more popular of late, is building purpose-built applications that are actually built as apps directly on the mobile OSs. And that's where we're going to spend the majority of the rest of our session talking about. There's important to understand, I think there's three different kinds of mobile applications and what the function of the application really is. One is simple applications. So for instance, maybe it's associated with your existing SFA or CRM application that enables you to download contacts to your mobile device. It's a one-way communication that goes on, and very simple to build and to deploy. A second category are mid-level applications, which are applications that have some interaction that goes on. So for instance, an expense management application. You create content by scanning or creating expenses on your device while you're out traveling. That information gets uploaded back to a back-end environment, and there might be some interaction that goes on between the two for, say, expense reproval or the like. And the third, the more sophisticated, the more comprehensive application is in the area of Salesforce automation, extending essentially not only the data, but also the processes of a CRM or a Salesforce automation application to your mobile workforce. We've seen a number of studies done in the marketplace, this one from 451 Research from the Yankee Group, indicating that more than 2/3 of enterprises are planning to increase their spending on mobile applications. And interestingly, one of the key areas that organizations are looking to make that investment is actually in extending mobile to their mobile sales force. Actually, you'll note the survey actually came back to say that executives were the top priority, but running a very close second is the people who actually make money for the organization, and that's the field sales force. So obviously, organizations are looking to make that investment. But one of the challenges, many that exist with mobile applications, is actually dealing with and providing the ability to deliver those applications offline. A couple of studies that were done, one with application developers working in large enterprises, found that 92% of those surveyed said that offline support was actually a critical part of their application deployment. And further in a study, 86% of the investment that's made both in time and in dollars is not in the application itself, but actually the middleware, the backend integration, all of the more complex infrastructure that goes into making a compound application actually work. So there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes beyond just building the basic application. So what can you do with the Amine mobile framework? Well, a couple of examples that I wanted to highlight. First is an application that was developed and deployed for AT&T for their mobile workforce, which is essentially building a complete new infrastructure and application to deploy CRM capability, and not only from one backend system, but actually from multiple backend systems and consolidating that information into one common application. Another more recently deployed, actually just last week, by the American Red Cross is a mobile application that enables the Red Cross to have a more interactive relationship with their blood donors for scheduling, for finding blood drives in different locations that people are in. So just a couple of examples from a business perspective, business to business or business to employee, or in the case of the Red Cross, a business to consumer. So what I'd like to do with that setup complete is transition the discussion here and introduce Rob Wing, our Chief Technology Officer. And what we'll do is actually, Rob's going to spend some time and go through and actually explain the Amine mobile framework and a bit more about the technology. But before we start, I'd like to do one more quick poll, and that is, I'd like to get an understanding from those of you about how you've gone about developing and deploying applications since we talked about them a little bit earlier for your mobile sales or your services organization if you have. So if you wouldn't mind just responding to the survey, basically choices are you've developed apps in-house, you've contracted out to have them developed by specialists, you may have them underway, or you haven't actually done any development deployment yet. Okay, interesting mix that we've got here as well. Give it a couple more seconds here. Looks like we've got the majority of the votes in. Okay, and here's the results. So again, a fairly equal spread between in-house or contracted out, some development currently underway, and approximately 30% of the attendees haven't done any actual development or deployment yet. Okay, great. Well, thank you for that. I'd like to now turn the presentation over to Rob.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Rob Wing, Amine's Chief Technology Officer, and following up on Don's introduction, I'm going to do a brief walkthrough of a little bit of, so how do you get there? On the idea of you want to deploy a functional mobile CRM application, either sales, service, selling, quoting, any of those functions. and what do you have to put together to make that happen. Then we'll look a little bit at deployability, but let me start with the 4 key items we have on the screen in terms of how do you make it happen. I'll introduce them here and then briefly expand on each below, along with, in a couple cases, a short demonstration as a recording so you can view that again and again offline. So the 4 key things we're going to go through in terms of how do you make it useful for the users and how do you make it a powerful application instead of a bolt-on or one of those more minor apps that Don was discussing earlier. So to me, the 4 key things are you have to put a lot of information at their fingertips, and we'll expand on where that comes from. But if you're going to have all this information and the users don't want to sit around waiting for it to synchronize, they want to get out and sell or finish their service or do any other part of their job except waiting for it to sync, you have to move the data rapidly. To keep it relevant, and this is one of the most difficult parts, you have to control what is sent to the devices to respect the backend security so that they get only what they should get, but also so they get enough information to do their job and that you're proactively driving the information to their devices so they have what they need ahead of time and don't have to manually work it over. And 4, deal with, in the case of an online app, there's a number of things that can happen while users are offline that can lead to conflicts or failures or rejections of changes that they've made, and you have to handle those cleanly and elegantly. So if I move forward, let me expand on these one at a time. So the first part is putting a lot of information at the user's fingertips. What do I mean by a lot of information? It's hundreds of thousands or millions of records. The natural next question is, well, why would you want to do that? And the answer is, why would you want to push it offline? It's because the offline data is always there and always fast, presenting a very usable application, a very effective application. And with more data, the users can do a better job of understanding more of the context of the customer, getting more of a customer 360, getting more of a history to let them do their jobs more effectively. But also, if you look at a couple of items, and these are just examples that we've seen through the years of things like accounts or sales opportunities, and by the time you have a good number of these, plus some history and the contacts and the addresses and the assets and all of the material lists. In the case of a manufacturing, you have a lot of SKUs. In the case of a telecommunications, you have a lot of control over what is allowed to be sold where, at which speeds, with which features, at which prices, and all of that just adds up, and it adds up quickly. Our deployment experience shows it's several 100,000 to start with and very frequently gets to millions. So if we hit that as our first point of we need a lot of data to get this to the user so that this app can become their primary gateway and primary use of a CRM system. The next key point is on how do we get it there fast enough? So we have all this data, right? We want to put hundreds of thousands of records of data onto the client, but the back-end systems are moving at something in the neighborhood of 1s to 10s of records a second. You do the math on that, and a user can sit for a long time waiting for that information to get to their device, which isn't really what they want to be spending their day doing. And this is one of the primary points we hear from customers of saying their current either PC-based or tablet phone-based or email-based offline system for CRM information just doesn't get the information to them fast enough. So one of the things that we've taken on, and one of the main value points of our system, is that we're keeping a set of servers, and behind the scenes we're constantly monitoring for what information has changed in any of the back-end systems that we connect to, with the objective that we're always ready to support a user sync, with the goal that we're going to get it done in a much, much faster pace. We'll show a demonstration of that in just a minute, in order to let the users do their sync, get their data, and get on with their life. And when there's a set of changes that the user has made, we're going to the trouble, and we'll discuss this a bit with the conflict resolution as well, but doing a number of parallel processing pieces into however many backend systems we're hooked up to again in order to keep the user syncs as fast as possible, get the user back to their job, get the user productive and moving forward. If we look at this in practice, let me take this as a recording of a demonstration of a new user installation. We did this as a recording so you can view it later. And we're going to look specifically at the new user setup scenario, driven from the new setup is an important part of rollout. Also, through a number of data upgrade scenarios, it can be necessary to do this several times during the course of a user working the application. We're going to see it going through 3 stages as part of pulling about 100 megs of data, or about 300,000 records, down to the device. And this is the complete new user setup process. So we first prepared all the information they need. Then we downloaded that. At this point, the device could go offline and it would work just fine. There's a number of robust retry cycles in the case that the user loses connection or they're trying to synchronize over a poor mobile data service, to retry and continue to work through any connectivity drops. And then we go through and systematically process all of the information that was arrived. And you can see through this that we pulled down, in this case, 281,000 records, and the user is ready to work. So that was the total process, if we look back at the particular statistics, total process to get a new user installed and up and running. If I move on to the third point, so first point was they need a lot of data. Second point is we got to move it fast because they don't want to sit around and wait for it. The third point was controlling what information goes to the device. And this is where most of the work is needed with other approaches, where it's sort of a roll your own. The mobile framework will store the information, but it doesn't really control how do you know what information to store. And here we've developed what we call a subscription approach that very explicitly defines within the security of the backend system what information do you want on the mobile device. So for example, you could establish that you want the active accounts for your territory based on the assignments that are made in Siebel or Salesforce, and bring in a set of activities, attachments, opportunities, quotations, other pieces. These are defined and configured in our system on a case-by-case basis. And you set up a set of rules that allows you to define what is the information that's relevant to the user. And we'll see a demonstration of that in a little bit. And you can see we put particular focus on defining the aging in or aging out. In other words, you might want contract renewals for the next 60 days and 30 days of activity history. I made that up, but there's quite a few patterns like that in the sales, service, quotation, ordering area, where you want to very carefully control what gets to the device, and you also want to clean it up when it's no longer relevant to the user, to prevent either excess data or there's a territory realignment or reorganization and you want to remove information from a user who it's no longer relevant for. So if we look at a short demonstration of that piece, again, I'll play a video, same idea, so you can review it later within the slides themselves. And we're going to make a subscription rule change and send out a large incremental sync to the device, in this case about 10,000 records. But we're going to start from the subscription rules. So this is a section of our administrative screens. We're skipping all the others to keep this simple, and looking just at the rules that would apply to how do you know what sales opportunities are being sent to the user. So in this case, we started with they were initially getting only the large accounts in the next 60 days, and we're going to expand that somewhat to include the smaller accounts that are closing in, or excuse me, the smaller opportunities that are closing in the next 30 days. So here we're going through and expanding the rules, expanding and controlling what it is that gets sent to devices. And as we finish that, we're going to manually force a sync. This is normally done just like email on a timer, but for our demonstration purposes, we're going to force it manually. And you'll see this will finish in about 10 seconds to pull down this roughly 10,000 additional records. This is a similar size that you might see with a territory realignment. So again, we're putting a fair amount of focus on making it easy to control what gets to the device and also to keep that as fast and as seamless to the user as possible.
Hey, Rob, we had a couple questions that came in around this synchronization process, and I think one thing that might help to expand on a little bit is the questions relate to synchronization being, I think people are familiar with sync being kind of a long, drawn-out process typically that happens, and that the device is essentially taken over during that time frame. So the question, one of the primary questions was, can sync actually happen in the background? Is that based on what the application's doing, or could you elaborate on that a bit?
Sure. So short answer, yes, synchronization can happen in the background. We do not lock the device during synchronization. And also we try to, as you saw from the performance metrics, keep it as fast and efficient as possible. That's to limit the amount of time someone has to wait. But the user can absolutely continue to work while synchronization is going on.
Okay, great. So then if I'm a mobile sales rep and I was in a building and I didn't have network connectivity, but then as I come out, the synchronization could all happen automatically, even though I didn't actually do anything.
Yes. Or if you're working in an area of poor connectivity, but some you can continue to work and the system will sync as best as it can in the background. And if only 1 in 5 succeeds, it'll continue to work just fine with that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks, Don. So if I charge forward, we had 4 key points. One was there's a lot of data. 2, you got to move it fast. And perhaps we should add and unobtrusively. The third one was you had to control what gets to the device. The fourth one is the trickiest one. And let me spend just a minute introducing this and go through with an example. So this is what happens when something goes wrong in the synchronization. And as much as we'd like to think that this can never happen, of course it does, because you have different users working on different sets of information, all working offline and then synchronizing later. So let me take you through an example scenario that a user might have done offline. In this case, we'll do a sales scenario, but it could as well be a service or a quoting or an ordering one, where they went through and made an update to an account. They discovered and created a sales opportunity, made a quote for that. They selected a set of products and got their pricing and set some discounts, perhaps working with the customer or directly in front of the customer. They've submitted that quote for approval. That finished that path of work. They also happened to complete some activity and updated the contact information for the customer while they happened to be talking to them. So they've done all of these things offline. So first piece to highlight is we have both a mixture of classic create, read, update, delete actions going on, and we have some non-CRUD actions going on, such as selecting products, setting discounts, submitting the quote for approval. These are running workflows, they're starting processes, they're much more involved, and they're not simple flip a field value one way or the other. So our system takes all of these together, and as we went through this, we would recognize that there's a set of dependencies happening here. That you don't want the quote without getting the opportunity, so if the backend system rejects the opportunity for whatever reason, you probably don't want the quote mated for an orphan, and you can't do the rest of the pieces as well. So if I look at 4 different failure scenarios, and how we would handle each of them. And let me also compare to the other 2 common approaches I know are out there, which are either stop synchronization at the first failure, force the user to fix the problem before you attempt anything else, or else the other classic option is just ignore anything that fails and keep charging forward with everything else. So in the first case, the account update failed, but all the rest of it worked. So in this case, because there's no dependency, we would highlight this to the user, but continue with all the rest of the operations. User would go back, view a conflict resolution screen, look at what they did versus what somebody else did, and decide what to do next. The next scenario we go through is what if in this case, the opportunity failed or was rejected. In this case, we're skipping some of the rest of the work because you got to get this right before this makes any sense, but we're completing the rest. The third one is the one to really be careful of, especially in a sales or quoting or ordering scenario, where in this case they were able to pick the products, but the discounts didn't work. They got rejected for one reason or the other, and then you really don't want to submit the quote for approval, or you really don't want to send the order if you didn't fill it out correctly as part of the sync operation. So this is where it can get really important to know what to skip and what to proceed with in cases where this would create a bad quote, a bad order, a bad completion to a service request, the wrong parts being ordered, those types of scenarios. And then the last one is a much simpler, very similar to the first one. What if some other random small thing has a conflict or doesn't work? Same idea of we skip the minor piece, continue with the major parts of the sync operation. So quickly recapping, the important part of this was to pay attention to directly what it is that a failure impacts. And this is where we spent a fair amount of time putting our mobile software together in terms of being able to do this well. So among the 4 points, this was the fourth of handling the conflicts, in addition to controlling the data that's sent to the user and moving it rapidly and covering a lot of it. If I can charge forward to a slightly different theme, that covers the functional part in a lot of ways, and let me spend just a minute on how do you get that solution then to the users. We haven't made an application yet, and we haven't supported it out there. So let me look again, 3 key points here. I'll expand them below, and please ask questions as we go. So one is flexibility on the mobile infrastructure, so that there's a very rapidly evolving and extensive marketplace of user interface technologies and app frameworks and MDM solutions. We work cleanly with largely all of them. There's a lot of deployment flexibility to mix and match online only with offline. You've heard me emphasizing the offline piece, driven both by the ability to go offline and the performance and consistency of it, but we do the online mode as well. And also a lot of flexibility on the backend infrastructure, be that Siebel or Salesforce or multiple combinations of all of that, or your custom data warehouses, whatever we have to connect to get the information or to send the updates, on the idea that most of the customers we work with have diverse and frequently evolving enterprise footprints, and you want a mobile solution that's going to continue to work as that backend or as the enterprise systems evolve. So first one, with the hopefully you'll find interesting acronym, bring your own IDE, or bring your own user interface. So we provide an SDK on the device, a set of APIs with simple query, update, run action type of methods, where we work with the popular device operating systems, Apple and Android. We work with the full range of UI development frameworks, whether that's an HTML5 that you want to have one app on many platforms, or take advantage of some of the unique pieces you can do with fully native apps. We support both patterns of working within that. In both cases, we keep a native data component, regardless of the user interface approach that you've taken. We did that and support that on both of those platforms, including the Cordova wrapper, in the interest of that performance we were talking about before, of getting the best possible performance to both the sync operations and also to the operations that the user does, running queries, making updates, viewing lists, scrolling lists, to make this as fast as possible for whatever the user is going to take on. And also the resulting app, we can work with any of the MDM systems out there managing the app. We're simply part of their payload.
So, Rob, not surprisingly, this particular topic area brought up some questions from the attendees.
Please.
There was one specifically asking about how this technology interoperates with Siebel Mobile Disconnect, and is this a customization in some way of existing mobile applications?
This would be a different approach from Siebel Mobile or OpenUI Mobile. So in this case, you would build with our SDK. I'll show the architecture in just a moment, and we'd work cleanly within hooking into Siebel, but we don't customize or otherwise harm those functions that Siebel uses.
Okay, great. Thanks.
If I could, let me keep charging forward. Also, let's see, I've been emphasizing the offline piece. And the offline piece is very powerful for, the offline and the availability, consistency, smoothness with which that you can work. We also work online, and there's a number of scenarios where that can either be a useful first stepping point, or it can be useful in scenarios such as inventory or perhaps pricing, where it's changing so rapidly that you don't want or risk people going offline thinking that there's two of something in stock when they finish there might not be. So whatever that scenario is, we work quite cleanly with either all the information moving offline, a mixture of online and offline, or all online. And we've deployed all of those application patterns. They all work fine. One of the interesting parts that we've done is, for us, once you've developed an online system, there's actually not very much difference in terms of making it offline. It's basically just add a checkbox to any particular object that you want to work with and supply the subscription rules of how do you know what the user should get, and it starts moving offline. So it provides a clean path to start one way and then gradually evolve the other as the direction matures or the application platform plans mature. And this also works just as well mixing and matching with multiple backends. So either in this case the blue would be one backend, the red would be another, the purple would be a third, and will work consistently regardless of where this all comes from. From the builder of the user interface standpoint, it's the same APIs working exactly the same way, whether it is online or it's offline, and whether it comes from one backend or another. To them, they don't even know where it goes or where it came from. And that was a lot of our goal, to hide that complexity from the app builder. Similarly, it can be changed as you go. Of this may start out in one system and end up in another system later, and again, the app builder would never know. The end users would never have to know.
So another couple questions that came in, Rob, while you were working through the flexibility discussion.
Please.
And that is, someone's familiar with the existing Amind web framework technology, and they were wondering whether this is based on the same technology or similar, and would you be using this to build APIs into to Siebel in the same way?
This is actually built with the Amind web framework. We market it as a separate product. It has quite a bit of mobile unique, especially offline unique functionality to it. And when you work with Siebel as a backend, it can be either the Amind web framework or Siebel web services, whatever is the preferred choice for the deployment of working within the Siebel as a backend.
Okay, and then one additional question, really speaking, I think, to scale, and that is what infrastructure is required for devices to support large data sets and transaction sets. And I think if you could address it both from the back-end side as well as from the device side.
Sure, let me present the architecture slide. I think it will make more sense with that. And if I don't answer it, please keep me honest before I move on. So let me quickly summarize and recap architecture. All these pieces we've looked at, but it got to look at the architecture diagram itself. So starting, we have on the device, that's the green box, excuse me, either Apple or Android. The amine data component, this is our piece of infrastructure on the device. This handles all of the data storage, it handles the synchronization, it handles the conflict resolution, it handles doing the right thing whether the user is online or offline. It completely buries all of that complexity from the person who's just assembling the user interface to provide the best possible user experience to the user. This can be used either directly native or with a phone gap or all of the other major application UI development frameworks all work with a Cordova wrapper if they're taking an HTML5 approach. On the server, we talked about, let me quickly recap the major functions. We talked about handling the synchronization, handling the rules for what goes where. We're constantly monitoring the backend systems with the objective of always being ready to serve a synchronization, no matter how large or small, no matter how long or short, out of our own data cache. And we're either querying or receiving pushes from the backend system in order to keep always updated and keep always ready. We didn't dive into it too deeply here, but there's also push notifications that we can send to the devices in scenarios like you have a new service request, you got a new customer, you have a quote approval waiting for you. So in cases where you want to sort of proactively push to the user a need to do something, that's there as well. We connect either directly with Salesforce or with the Siebel system, and there's an SDK available on the server side to add more backends or custom backends or to accommodate more significant customizations to either of the Siebel or the Salesforce. And there's a fairly straightforward set of APIs such as insert, update by ID, query by example that get implemented, and at that point the whole rest of the stack works. If we talk about infrastructure, so what's needed to support this? On the device side, it's a tablet or a phone, depending on the complexity of the app that you're showing. The actual size of the mobile data component itself is only a couple megs, then the data comes in. The data is most of what you're talking about. Realistically, this is probably 50 to 500 megabytes of data, which is less than a movie. I mean, if you compare a good, robust mobile CRM application, the total storage it needs is about the same as a low-def movie. Or phrased differently, a few percent of the storage capacity of most modern tablets and phones. From a server standpoint, there's infrastructure to support this side. There's a web server and the data storage. That's a few hundred gig of storage and a server or two depending on the throughput needed. Obviously, as the users get into the thousands, there's a few more servers needed. Let me pause, Don. Did that hit the question as you understand it? Any other questions we should hit here?
Yeah, no, that covered it, Rob. Good detail. Thank you.
Thank you. So we covered the deployability pieces, working with the major UI frameworks and mobile device management, mobile app management frameworks, working with a variety of other systems that we have to integrate with on both the front end and the back end in order to manage the system. If we sort of driving onward, in the interest of avoiding death by PowerPoint, oh wait, everybody's muted so I don't get a mercy laugh. In the interest of avoiding death by PowerPoint, we haven't done a full recitation of all the features. Hopefully the few ones that we looked at and the major points were interesting for a few folks, and we're very interested in following up from here. and we can dive much deeper into more of the functions, more of the capabilities, and what the system more completely offers. But summarizing, what we're going after here is the large data shapes, very fast synchronization, not bugging the users while we're doing it, handling behind the scenes all of the various failure scenarios of what happens if you try to download but it doesn't work, what happens if you try to send in an insert but it works but the server response never gets to the device, does it send another insert? There's quite a few cases in there that create quite a bit of work, either to develop on a custom basis or to deal with from a system that doesn't handle them well. A lot of conflict handling and resolution and avoiding the problems wherever we can, and consistent results regardless of backends or systems. This webinar we pushed heavily with a Siebel audience, but please know this works with Siebel just as well as quite a few other backend choices, whether you have a customized Siebel or a close to out-of-the-box Siebel. We have the backend SDK to accommodate that, and we put a fair amount of energy into making sure this would continue to be useful and continue to be valuable regardless of where the CRM and other systems may evolve to. Last piece for those who are stuck around long enough to learn about what Amind is, who we are. We've been working on enterprise middleware for quite a few years. The Amind web framework, for the people who asked about that, was our first one. That first one went live in 2007, but we started out doing connected applications mostly to computers, but again focusing on Siebel and focusing on very efficient, very usable applications. The customers a few years ago started saying, hey, can you do responsive web design and make this work on tablets too? We've got tablets in our stores. We want to use the same ordering application on tablets. So we started building out that area, and then we've been expanding the Amind mobile framework, our second product offering, through about 2 years now, and a couple of revisions in terms of expanding how well it works, how smoothly it works, and getting to more front ends and more back ends as we've gone.
Well, that's great, Rob. Thank you. You did quite a thorough review, although, as you pointed out in one of the previous slides, there's a whole lot more to this than what we were able to present today. For all of you that were interested in getting some additional information, there's information on the Amind Solutions website. We have a resource library on the site with an extensive collection of case studies, data sheets, collateral, and of course, we'd be very interested in talking with any of you following the webinar that might be interested in both learning more about the applications, the technology, the infrastructure, as well as looking at potential deployments. So with that, we've actually captured all of the key questions, Rob, as we went along the way. So thank you all for attending, and look forward to working with you in the near future.